So I mentioned there that you can choose to put money in. You can do 22.5. If you're over 50, you can do 30. But a lot of employers will also have the opportunity to put money into your 401k plan. Now, this is something that's interesting. Employer contributions used to always go in pre-tax, but something else has changed recently, where now with the Secure Act 2.0, employers can offer a matching Roth option where you can make an election that, hey, I want my employer dollars not just to go in the pre-tax bucket, I want to go in the Roth bucket. There is a caveat, you have to pay income tax on that. So it's an important thing to note in 2023. But maybe this is all foreign to you and this isn't something you've heard of. We want to tell you the number of different types of contributions that your employer may be making into the account on your behalf.
Yeah, the first one, this is the one that we really talk about with step 2 of the financial order of operations. This is employer match, meaning that you have to give something, whether it's 50, it's going to be a 50% match. It's going to be a 100% dollar for dollar match. Pay attention to what your employer says you have to do to get this free money. Don't overlook this because it's so important. Because think about this, Bo. If somebody offers you a 50 cents on every dollar you contribute up to like 6% of your pay, that's basically a 50% guaranteed rate of return. If your employer offers you dollar for dollar up to like 3 to 6%, that is 100% guaranteed rate of return on whatever dollar you put in. Take advantage of that. That's free money. There's not many things that are going to pay you at those levels every year guaranteed. And the reason they can do it is because the government heavily incentivizes your employers to essentially prime the pump. So take advantage of that.
Here's what I think is crazy. I love the way you frame that. If it's a dollar for dollar match, it's 100% rate of return. We just showed you the stat that 34% of 401k participants are not getting their full employer match. So 34% of folks are saying, I don't want a 100% rate of return. I don't want a 50% rate of return. I don't want free money. Make sure that you do not fall into the camp. It's why we put it so early on those financial order of operations. You cannot miss that. So number 1 is matching. You put money in, your employer puts money in. Another type of contribution that your employer may make is what's known as a non-elective contribution. And these are pretty fantastic. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is show up and meet requirements like I've been there for a year, or I'm age 21, whatever your plan dictates. And the employer is going to say, hey, so long as you are eligible to participate in the plan, we're going to put money into it for you. So there are a number of plans that operate this way. I don't do anything, and my employer decides to put in 3% of my salary into the 401k. It's a pretty fantastic benefit to have.
Now, this is great, probably, especially if you have, consumer debt, credit cards, even student loan debt. You might be paying attention to this. But I do want to caution you. Just because your employer is generous, don't forget, you do need to be prioritizing what you save and invest for retirement.
Yep.
There's a reason we encourage you to get to that 20 to 25% of your gross income as fast as possible, but still very generous employer if you have a non-elective provision built into your plan.
All right, so we've talked about matching, you put in, they put in. We've talked about non-elective, just they put in. There's another type that you ought to be aware of, and this is called a profit-sharing contribution. A lot of employers will say, you know what, I want to reward my workforce. I want to make available a benefit where if the company's doing well, if we're growing, in addition to the matching, in addition to the non-elective, we want to put even more money into the account. And profit sharing is most often where some of those Section 415 limits get hit. If you're hitting $66,000 per year in your 401k, that's likely some big portion of that is profit sharing, where essentially the employer rewards you based on either your work or your class or your status as an employee in the firm with additional contributions into your 401k. So it is not uncommon, again, for large employers, big companies, to put a lot of money into the pot for their employees for saving for the future.
Well, and realize these are all stackable. If you think about the fact your salary deferral, that's what you put in, that goes in. The matching money from your employer goes in on top of that. And then the profit sharing sits on even on top of that. So this is completely stackable. It's not an either or. This is an and opportunity. Yep. So really cool. You can see how this really builds and turbocharges and accelerates your walk to financial independence.
But they recognize recognize, right? So the government as well as employers recognize this is a huge benefit. And there's a little bit of risk. Like we as an employer, when we say, hey, we're going to put money into our employees' 401k accounts, we really want to make sure that those employees are going to be here long term. We want them to be part of the ongoing firm, part of the ongoing process. So one of the things that employers are allowed to do with these types of contributions is they can put what's called a vesting schedule, meaning you have to work here for a certain amount of time before all of these dollars become yours, before it's actually your money. And so there's a few different types of vesting options you ought to know about. The first is safe harbor. Now, safe harbor is a really interesting thing. I can't remember when it was introduced, but it's been around for a number of years, which basically said, hey, we recognize that for like small businesses, 401ks are a huge opportunity for tax savings for the owners, but we don't want the owners and the highly compensated people to be disproportionately advantaged inside of the plan. So long as an employer is willing to make a contribution on behalf of their employees at some minimum level, it's usually no less generous than 3% non-elective or a 4% match, then we're going to let the employer max out their salary deferrals, right? Well, safe harbor contributions in almost all circumstances, not all circumstances, but almost all circumstances are 100% vested. So just like the money you put into the plan is always your money, if you have safe harbor contributions going into the plan on your behalf, it is also almost always 100% your money the day that it's funded.
I think it's interesting, but I have to confess, I'm old enough that I remember pre-safe harbor.
Yeah.
And a lot of small businesses didn't do 401ks because they were worried about all the testing requirements, the complexities, the costs that went into this. Safe harbors were game changers because what they do is they basically, and this is something if you work for a small business or you own a small business, you would more than likely want to take advantage of this because it's going to basically cut through all the chaos of the testing and all the requirements and lay out a set of rules that if you will give your employees this with the 100% vesting that Bo talked about, we're going to let you, the employer, contribute this without jumping through as many hoops as the old traditional 401ks. Really cool opportunity for everyone involved because you, the employee, you get your money and it's your money. You don't have to have the golden handcuffs where you're there for 6 years or so forth. It's good for the employer because now they don't have to worry about they put money in this plan. End of the year, they have to yank it out because they failed some test. This is a win-win. Advocate to your employer if you don't have a 401k, and this is something you might want to look into.
And one of the, I don't know if this was an intended or unintended consequence of this, with the introduction of safe harbor contributions and plans, it actually drove the overall costs of 401k plans down because now they are so much easier to administer. There's so much less testing. So now 401ks are way more affordable than they were when you first started practicing many years ago.
Okay, let's chill on the...
So we have safe harbor contributions that are immediately vested. Another type of vesting that you may have on employer dollars they put in is you might have what's called cliff vesting, meaning after you've worked at the employer for some number of years, you become 100% invested. Most often it's like 3 years. So a profit sharing contribution goes into your account. You have to work there for at least 3 years before that money is 100% your money. Well, why does this matter? Let's say you're taking a new job and you're trying to figure out if it works, and one of the benefits is a big profit-sharing contribution into your 401k plan. You get there in year 1 and year 2, you're thinking, oh, I don't know if this is a great fit. Should I stay? Should I go? If you have a cliff vest, you kind of know in your mind, if I want to be able to take those dollars with me to my next job or with me into the future, I have to make sure that I'm at least here for the amount of time required for me to be fully vested in all of my employer contributions.
I know when I left the last employer I worked for before I started my first company in the early 2000s, I actually went and read the plan document to see, hey, what is the vesting? What works here? Where does because we'll get to a graduated vesting in a second, but here's what I think is interesting is you also need to make sure last day provisions, because some plans will have what's called a last day provision on profit sharing and so forth. So as Bo shared, if you're going to be taking a new job, do not overlook figuring out what the vesting is on your plan so you don't walk away with a big oopsie. Oh my goodness, I walked away from thousands of dollars. If I had just waited a month or two, I would have gotten this and more because you'd also qualified for the current contribution that they're going to do for the last year with profit sharing. pay attention to this stuff. It's very important, and it could be thousands upon thousands of dollars for your retirement.
And then the third type of vesting schedule is a graded vesting schedule. Essentially, it occurs in increments over several years. Most often, it's a 6-year graded vest that you see most commonly. Again, you want to make sure if you are thinking about changing jobs, if you are thinking about investigating other opportunities, you review your 401k balance to know how much of that money is actually yours and how much, if you were to leave, goes back to the company. Now, here's something I see people do all the time, Brian, that I think it's crazy. Someone will leave and they'll be like, hey, I noticed that I've only got 60% vested in this employer contribution. But guess what? I left the company. I didn't roll my plan over, so they left those dollars in my account. They're still there.
Yeah.
It is not your money. Just because you leave it in the account, just because you're seeing those unvested dollars continue to grow, it does not mean that they become your dollars. Because what happens is when you leave or when you do ultimately roll it over, all those dollars get forfeited. They do not belong to you unless you come back to work at that employer and begin working back towards that vesting schedule. So you need to be aware of this before you make job changes so that you understand what your dollars in your plan actually are.
And I think it's one other clarifying point. Just like there's different sources, there's your contributions, there's employer match, and then there's profit sharing and other parts. They can have different vesting. Now, first of all,
that's a great point.
Your contributions are always vested, 100% vested what you put in. However, your employer matching, if it's a safe harbor, more than likely it's 100% vesting, but that profit sharing is more than likely going to have some type of golden handcuff provision, whether it's 20% per year for the first 5 to 6 years. You'll quickly realize they can be different. You need to do the full 360 research to know every component, what everyone requires, so it turns into your money.